There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms. This is a beautiful day, beautiful night, whatever you want to call it, but the whole crew is here. Mm-hmm. The band is back together. There's no Yoko Ono influence here. I only bring that up because there's so many Beatles Christmas songs, and so...
Yeah, I thought you were going to say something about Kirsty.
All right. Move on.
No. Anyway, so we're all here. We haven't been together in a little bit. How was your Thanksgiving, guys?
Thanksgiving was good. I went out, looking, tramping around in the snow looking for pheasants.
So I got to tell you, so I looked at your picture of that.
Yeah.
And I thought, I think he's in a place that's closed to hunting. But
no, it's not.
But I'm like, Mike wouldn't do that.
No.
I thought I recognized the spot. But I clearly didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, only Dave hunts there.
Yeah, no, we went to a game and fish spot, and we also went on some private land.
That's fun.
So it was a little mix of both, and there were 4 of us post-holing.
Yeah.
Through snow, and we saw one bird. two doves.
Collared doves, I'm presuming.
I think so. We didn't shoot it.
There's 2 feet of snow. They're not mourning doves around.
No, I didn't think so either. I was like, I bet that's a safe shot, but I'm not taking it.
They're just pigeons.
Yeah, right. And then we did see two bald eagles, and then about 15 deer.
Yeah, this is a cool time of year because in that area where you were, they're typically bald eagles are migrating in and spending the winter there, and so there's usually several around. That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I like that area.
Yeah, it was really cool.
So you the lesson you learned is you need to get a bird dog.
Yeah, absolutely. And I posted something on Facebook that there's a strong correlation between owning a bird dog and being expected to cook the bird on Thanksgiving. Because everybody I talked to that I know that has a bird dog was like, oh, I'm sorry, I got to cook the bird. I can't be away from the kitchen. Man. Well, I'm going home.
Can the dog be?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I didn't go there, but one guy was out of town. Fair enough, but yeah, a couple other guys. It's like, no, I'm responsible for cooking the bird. I was like,
well,
that's how that goes.
I didn't have to cook a bird. I ate at Denny's. Family Thanksgiving dinner at Denny's. Kids had chocolate chip pancakes.
Yeah.
I had the turkey and stuffing dinner with a side of pumpkin pie.
You didn't even have to cook or clean or
it was
do anything.
It was perfect.
You had to pick off the menu.
I actually had planned ahead. I reserved it. So we were touring the Southwest, a bunch of national parks and monuments in the Southwest U.S., and I'd planned ahead, and I'd planned Thanksgiving in Moab, and I rented a place that had a kitchen, thinking we'll just go out and we'll, maybe just do a rotisserie chicken or something and some, stovetop stuffing and have a little family dinner in this place. And turns out the only thing open in Moab on Thanksgiving is Denny's. Yeah, grocery stores are closed.
Yeah,
I couldn't find food. So
I ate at a really nice restaurant.
It's as if it was Thanksgiving,
right?
Yeah, right.
Like, come on, people aren't supposed to be home with their families when I'm trying to get food.
Yeah, I ate at a really nice restaurant one time up on top of the
I saw that place. I figured my wallet wasn't thick enough to be able to eat there.
It was it was a work retreat when I worked in private practice.
Oh, that's why. Yeah. That's a cool looking place that I looked at from afar, gazing up.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Nephi, what'd you do?
I went to my in-laws. So I drove in a snowstorm one way, and then I drove in a snowstorm the other way. But it was really cool because my in-laws live in Casper, Wyoming, which is along the North Platte, and they have a really big natural area. And I took my 20-week-old field golden, and we spent every day, 3 days in a row, we just went and hiked through the bushes and chased ducks and sniffed, and he was just having the absolute time of his life. And it was just super fun seeing that little dog like starting to just kind of get it.
So
Did some work with him on long line and stuff like that. It was fun.
So what I hear is for any Wyoming game wardens listening, Nephi Cole was harassing wildlife. He admitted to it on this podcast, harassing ducks. I didn't hear you saying you were hunting them. And his address is, well, you can find it.
We just happened upon them. We weren't trying to harass them. It just happened
Okay.
while you're hiking.
Gotcha. I don't just you said chasing ducks and stuff. I'm like, well,
Yeah, I mean,
not supposed to be harassing wildlife out there, Nephi.
well, Dave,
You give me a hard time. You give me a hard time. I can jab
such
it right
a
back.
fun
Right?
hater.
Yeah. All right. So what are we talking about tonight?
Alternative funding methods for wildlife.
I like it. So we've talked a lot about on these podcasts, especially if you go back to the very beginning. We've talked a lot about the current mechanisms for funding wildlife management. Right. Mm-hmm. We've talked about Pittman-Robertson Act, Dingell-Johnson Act. We've talked about the license revenue coming into the agencies, making up another big portion of wildlife funding.
Yep.
So we've talked about the current structure of wildlife management, but what we haven't talked a lot about, we've talked some about this, we haven't talked a lot about the fact that the number of hunters in the country is declining. And what goes along with that is and to give you some perspective on how much it's declining, we're down to about 11.5 million people in the country hunt, out of a country of about 300.
It's about 5% of Americans hunt right now.
Right. It's down more than 2 million people in 5 years. That's a significant drop. So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does a survey every 5 years. They survey outdoor recreation generally, right? They're talking about who's involved in hunting, angling, other outdoor recreation activities as a percentage of the population, the economic contributions of all of those. Right? And so they did the last one in, I believe it was 2016.
I think that's right.
And in 2016, the numbers were down over 2 million people from 2011. That's a pretty significant drop.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a big drop as it relates to the United States, but that's a big drop of hunters within the hunting community.
Right.
That's huge.
That's a huge drop. And when you figure that the source of revenue for a lot of these agencies around the country, as we've talked about in the past, is derived from license sales, for one.
A huge chunk of it.
Huge chunk of it is from license sales. And then we've talked about the other chunk of it coming from the sale of
assorted
sporting goods equipment, right?
Yeah.
Guns, ammunition, archery equipment, boating equipment, all that sort of thing. And the breakdown of that's a bit different. We've talked about that breakdown before too. But for the purposes of this, just know that a good chunk of that money comes from hunter and angler or hunter participation. So when you lose hunters, lose participants, you lose revenue streams that are used not just to manage your huntable species, not your traditional game species, but all of this revenue is used to manage all wildlife. Most states have statutes that talk about it's the Game and Fish or Fish and Game agency's responsibility to manage all wildlife. And in order to do that, they have to have the revenue. The revenue comes from those sources, or traditionally has come from those sources. So when you have a declining hunter population, that means a declining revenue stream in a lot of states.
Yeah.
And how do you make up that difference? And that's the segue into really some of what we want to talk about today is, what some states have done already to try and make up some of those differences. Some other ideas that we know that are out there that we've either thought of or heard people talk about that could be used as supplements to that, and maybe some things that are being considered on the federal level as well. So with that, am I missing some background there? I didn't want to spend too much time on it, but I wanted to provide a little background on
that
the
works.
funding.
That works.
Yeah. All right. So I know Nephi, you're looking at a notepad. You've got a bunch of ideas, I think, for. First of all, how do you want to do that? Let me ask you this: should we start This is sort of a choose your own adventure, right? Should we start?
Not for the listener.
No, we're choosing it for you.
Yeah.
But for us, it's to choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
Do we want to start with what are some of the things that states are doing right now, and then go into ideas? I think maybe that's what we should do. What are some of the things states are doing right now, and then let's talk
what
about
we did in the past already.
Exactly. That's
so
what
in
I'm
the
talking
past
about.
already, and not just states, but I mean the biggest thing that I wrote down is so declining hunter numbers. The first thing I want to say is like everybody get off your butts and take somebody hunting, and that's the first thing we have to do. We've got to try and increase the number of people who are getting out and being involved in hunting and the shooting sports, and it's not that hard to do. We talked about the numbers that we've lost, and we're down a couple million. But the 11 million of us who are left, if everybody takes somebody, we could turn the corner. We could claw our way back, and it's just important, I think, for everybody to just not just give up on that. So that's number one.
Now we did talk last week, like one of the things that we have to do is we got to reduce the barriers to entry as well, and we've talked about that. Yeah. I mean we do want to be able to recruit more people. We've got to get rid of some of the barriers to entry that are out there.
Yeah, the biggest barrier, we'll move on.
Yeah.
But the biggest barrier to this is it's ourselves. The hunting community, we are creating our own barriers for people to get into it. It's not the anti-hunting community keeping more people from hunting. It's the hunting community keeping more people from hunting. And that's a reality.
I think it's fair to say it's not a sport that you can pick up on your own and be successful at.
Well, that's what I mean.
It takes someone helping and lending a hand and giving ideas or showing a few spots or something like that. I mean, if you just try to figure out the regs, try to figure out what to pack, what to bring, what caliber to use, what species to go for, what time of year, where to even find those things, that's difficult and can be daunting for somebody that could just as easily pick up a different sport that is more intuitive, or they've already got buddies that are going to help them out with it.
I was reminded this week about how exclusionary we are sometimes in the hunting community when I made the mistake of getting involved in a Facebook conversation.
There's so many problems with that sentence.
I know. There's no such thing as a conversation.
It was a group. It was a group that's advocates for.
PETA?
No.
Is it PETA?
Advocates for hunters advocating for things like access and who are very in public lands.
I know a guy who's on our podcast, by the way. I know a guy that was on our podcast.
Yeah.
That challenged PETA on something on Twitter and got banned by PETA because he legitimately, and I don't even remember what it was. And he's been on our podcast. He's probably listening to this right now, but he's I'll
probably get banned.
He got banned from the PETA Twitter, permanently blocked for calling them out on some stuff. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
So for me, somebody on the podcast or on the text string threw out some political comment, and I made the mistake of wading in and saying, look, these issues, like, they're divisive, and if you choose your political affiliation based on, he's telling everybody to vote a certain way because of this issue, and what I said is don't be dumb. You need to look at all the candidates. You need to look at where they sit on these issues, and you need to choose accordingly. And then it devolved into
hard to imagine why this day and age that didn't work.
Well,
out.
if you start with don't be dumb, it's pretty hard for the conversation to go well.
I did not say that. But what was funny is, like, this individual, like, he went out and basically drew one of those lines in the sand that of like,
on a very
these gun owners aren't like me. I'm not worried about this. And so, like, suddenly it became like it became a subset of hunting was all he really cared about. And then, like, I was like, man, why do we do this every time?
A gun debate with somebody on Facebook?
No. But anyway, so it just reminds me that within the hunting community, hunters represent 20% of that community. Yet, why would we alienate people who are firearms owners but who don't hunt right now?
Who are actually probably paying
they're making
very large contribution.
He's making fun of people. He's making fun of people because of where they go to buy a gun.
Well, look, I'd take it a step farther than that. It's not just the others in the shooting sports industry. It's 95% of the country doesn't hunt. Yeah. 95% of the country does not hunt.
Their encounter with hunting is what they've read about the history of what Daniel Boone did.
Right. Or
They don't relate to a human that they know today.
pictures that they see pop up on the internet of people standing behind some animal.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Or like the video that was one of the links on Drudge Report today about hunters that were poking at a deer as it was dying.
I was still kids.
So, so I guess
but
Let me tell you where I'm going with that.
Yeah.
Before we.
yeah, but I do want to make that point that we got to be thinking. I mean,
bigger. The reason
we need the 95%. Frankly, more than the 95% needs us.
for sure. But it's the same way, I think, and that was the issue for me. It was, and I'm sorry, I don't want to make it about guns, but in the guns community, it's the same way. Like we've got to wrap our arms around everybody in the community who is somewhat like us and try and bring them in. It doesn't make any sense to say for us as hunters to become elitists. If we are elitists and we're like, we're going to exclude other people, we're going to make it harder to get in. And that was the crux of what I was trying to get to. Like, we're doing this to ourselves. Every time we make it harder for people or we try and make ourselves cooler or more special or more exclusive, we are killing we are cutting off our nose to spite our own face. And it just doesn't make any sense. Now,
I want to come back to that a little later in the podcast because I got a couple of thoughts on that too.
And then what I was going to say, so here's something to think about: taxes. I mean, really, that's how we've paid for wildlife in the past. And almost everything we're going to talk about here, regardless of what everybody wants to, we'd love for money to fall out of the sky. And Congress is going to, whatever we're talking about some money has to be generated from somewhere to put towards wildlife. And it's kind of interesting that some of the ways that we've decided to do that, we talk about Pittman and Robertson all the time. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? When we weren't getting enough Pittman and Robertson dollars from the sales of rifles for hunting, what did we do?
Ducks to bows. And
we expanded it.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we expanded it to handguns, which is 50% of the market. So we have already, in this community, the firearms and shooting sports community, we have already expanded beyond just hunters. We've already realized that pot wasn't big enough, and we increased that by roping in new items and bringing in to Pittman Robertson. So my first idea of how do you do it? You look at ways for Pittman Robertson. You look at expansion of that outside of where you have before. We've done it before. We've been innovative with it before. And it's just broadening the pieces of, the stuff that act touches.
What would that be?
There's a lot of different things you could talk about. I think it should be mountain bike tires.
Mountain bike tires? Well, I didn't think that was going to come out of your mouth.
Or let's see. That's a joke, everybody. Don't everybody go write your mountain bike representative. But I mean, really, it could be pick an item that's used in the great outdoors.
Before we dive into that, because what you're talking about is a new funding source.
I'm talking about an expansion of existing.
Right, but hitting new things, right?
Right.
Which we've done
a
before.
different item
right.
under the umbrella of Pittman Robertson.
I get that.
Yeah.
But
there's just an idea for you.
But it's an idea, right. I want to talk more about those ideas. I do think it's worth hitting on some of the things that states have done already.
Okay. And so that's why I brought this up, because I just brought this up because on the federal level, what did we do? First of all, we established Pittman Robertson, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have expanded it. And then we had Dingle Johnson, and we have expanded it. So those are things that on the federal level we've done. Now talk about states. So we have done this. We've already gone out and scraped the floor to get more coins.
To the tune of over $1 billion a year.
Yeah, and it's worth people knowing that, a lot of times we talk about those PR dollars. Their significance is much bigger now than it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
Those PR dollars.
Absolutely.
And that's good because as we all know, hunting as a percentage, how many people are buying licenses and the percentage of funding that's going into game and fish from licenses, that has gone down, and game and fish's responsibilities have gone up.
A lot. Well, the demands on agencies are huge. From the hunting community, you start with just the hunting community, and the demands are big.
Yeah.
We want to have, wardens everywhere. We want to have access programs where we're paying landowners for, to provide access to hunters. We want to be able to have, contributions to search and rescue so that when we do something stupid, somebody can come out and save our butts, right? We want to have the hunter mentor programs. We want to have expos, conventions that bring people together to recruit new hunters. There's so many things that we want more biologists to be able to help recover, have
Maybe
more
you
of
do.
everything.
I'm just kidding.
I'm
Yeah, for
using
sure.
the collective we.
For sure.
And that's before you get to the other demands of, we have species that we don't want to see listed as threatened and endangered. They're not huntable species, and we demand our game and fish agencies do everything they can to prevent those species
and
from
that demand is
going on this.
huge
And it's
right
a
now.
big demand.
It's how much of Wyoming Game and Fish's budget went to non-game?
I don't.
It was big.
It's not as big as you'd think. It looks like a big number, but it's as far as an overall percentage of the budget, it's not as big as you'd think. It's not as big as it probably needs to be, actually. But then there are other programs like, we want to be able to compensate landowners that have losses, crop losses, or livestock losses that are caused by wildlife.
Well,
right?
here's part of
And
the
so
problem.
We're paying for that too.
Part of the problem that we run into, you said it's not as big as it ought to be. And here's the biggest issue that we're talking about tonight and dealing with. There is never enough money for everything.
That's a fact.
And at some point, you have to prioritize and you have to decide what the priority will be. And up until this point, the reality is game species have been a priority. Why? Because there's a group of people that cared enough to pay for them to be a priority.
Right.
And now what you have is a bunch of other people who, frankly, don't care to pay, but are showing up at the table and saying, I want you to make all these other things priorities. I don't want to pay for it myself, but I want them to be a priority.
Well, that's not necessarily true, because here's the other
In
problem.
many cases,
Here's
it
the other problem is some of them do say, okay, I'll pay for it. I want to pay for it. And this kind of gets back to an earlier point. The hunting community in a lot of instances is resistant to that. So
You're not lying.
I'm absolutely not lying. So the hunting community has become accustomed to being to be able to say, hey, we have this
Cater to me because we pay for the
we
bill.
pay for it, and we have we have some political clout, and we can go in and we can say we pay for it, so you should do X, Y, or Z. And there's a fear amongst the hunting community, and I've heard it a lot.
Yeah,
and
now I'm going to stop you.
No, let me finish the thought.
I got to argue with you.
I know, that's fine,
Okay.
but let me finish the thought, because I just want to explain what the fear. So there's a fear within the hunting community that if we expand the funding base to include non-hunters, to include the bird watchers and the backpackers and the bikers that don't also cross over and hunt, then they will put demands on
their issues
on
to be
their
addressed.
issues,
Yeah.
and they will think, well, now we pay for it too, and so we should have a seat at the table in making these decisions. And that scares a
Now, I'm
lot
gonna
of people in the hunting community. I'm not
Here's-
saying I have a counter to that too. Let's hear yours.
The counter is, what a bunch of BS. Because here's the counter. Because those people that are saying, a lot of those people who are saying that are people who, frankly, people like those who resisted the backpack tax, who said, you know what, we really would pay in, but hunters, it's their fault that we're not doing it. And if you go talk to those in the community who are paying, for example, Pittman Robertson funds, you're not going to find somebody you're not going to find this position on paper anywhere where somebody advocated and said, we really don't want anybody else putting their money
I
in.
think there's a fear.
I've heard people
It's
say
anecdotal.
that.
Well,
It's
okay,
anecdotal.
but there certainly could be a fear that that's going to be the result. But I would counter that those folks that they're worried about having an influence and a voice in the process are already there.
That was going to be my counter. Different from That's where it was.
I mean,
my counter is going to be different.
The system is completely set up for all voices to be heard, and the idea that somehow because
They're paying
one
in.
might start paying and they have a louder voice, maybe they maybe a little more credibility or something.
Yeah.
but that's they're already there.
Here's the way I'd explain it. The game and fish commissions, which set the policies for the game and fish or fish and game agencies, right? They set the hunting seasons. They're setting the agenda, right? Those are largely made up of citizens of the state that are appointed by the governor. Now, every state has a different. Every state legislature has set up a different allocation for how those agencies will be or how those commissions will be established, right? So in some states, it might be by district and political affiliation. In some states, they might say you need to have somebody from the agriculture industry, a sportsman, somebody from the environmental community, and they might they'll do it that way, and a biologist, right? So every state does it a little bit differently. The way that the commission is structured is a political process through the legislature. The way that the commission is appointed is a political process through the governor. In New Mexico earlier this year, the new governor was elected, came in and dismissed every single commissioner and replaced them with the people she wanted on the commission.
A very, very unusual.
It's unusual, but it can happen.
Sure.
And so,
She also wanted to change the name.
My point is the politics of the state are going to influence a lot what the composition of the commission and whose voice is ultimately heard over the other.
The decision makers.
Look at California.
Yeah.
California is the one I throw out as like the big example, right? Hunters are still paying for wildlife management in California, like every other state is,
Yet
right?
they can't hunt anything.
but you have a commission that's exactly right. You have a legislature that comes in and says, well, we're not gonna hunt mountain lions anymore. No more trapping of bobcats. And so it becomes political, and it doesn't matter that the hunters have contributed and are the ones that continue to contribute to that big pot of money for conservation. The influence is, and that's why I said early on, it's so important that the hunting community recognize that we're only 5% of the population and that we need that 95% to support hunters, the more than they need us to support them. And because, if you have the 95% or the vast majority of them supporting hunting and the hunting community, then when you have commissions that are made up of these diverse groups that aren't all hunters, you're not finding yourself in a position where you're having your heritage eroded upon.
Hunters are in a very uniquely and challenging spot.
Okay, so I just want to point out that Dave started out saying, okay, let's talk about where we were. And you said, okay, let's talk about where we were. And then you expanded onto where we're going. And then Dave said, okay, let's get back and talk about where we were. And we never went there.
Okay,
so David, get back to the
talk
state
about
stuff.
where we were. Okay. So, but we had to get some of that philosophical stuff out there.
Yeah,
it was going to come out
sure,
at some point,
sure,
right?
That's why I waited.
Yeah.
To point this out.
I appreciate it. So what have some states done? And I think it's worth pointing out what some states have done. And there's a variety of things that have been done. So, for example, states like Arizona and Colorado and Maine have established lotteries. And a portion or all of the revenue generated from those lotteries.
It's just a tax on the stupid.
It is. Yeah.
Let me check my lottery tickets today.
Just kidding. As a guy who helped set up the Wyoming Lottery Corporation.
As a guy that I know for a fact, I've been into your office so many times where you're looking at your lottery tickets.
Hey, it's like my child. I'm very proud.
Okay, so lottery is one thing. We also have license plates.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, for example, that's one that comes to mind. Georgia is another one that comes to mind.
Florida has that.
Does Florida have one as well?
Well, I guess it depends on what you're talking about. Because I can remember one of the first vanity plates in Florida being like the Florida Panther.
Yeah.
Conservation.
And so the money, you bought that plate and the money went back into conservation. Yeah. So
for that specific species.
I know there are a number of states that do that. Wyoming now does it for wildlife overpasses. Wildlife crossings. So it could be underpasses too. Wildlife crossings. So those are some. And then you have things like Texas and Virginia actually have outdoor equipment sales taxes, not unlike the Pittman-Robertson Act, but including a lot more things, sales tax. And then you have probably the state that's the best funded out there, Missouri, actually, after multiple attempts, passed a constitutional amendment to create a general sales tax. I think it's like 0.9%, and all of that and it's constitutionally protected, and all of that goes into funding conservation.
That's like as much as our liquor tax in
Now-
Wyoming.
It's important to note.
And they have a lot more people paying it.
Yeah, right.
I talk about. I hammer this sometimes. People need to understand the difference, though. There is a difference between money that's coming in that goes for conservation, and money that goes specifically to wildlife and habitat. And just to bring this out so people know. So,
Yeah.
for example, if we're looking at farm bill dollars that go on the ground, farm bill dollars, $4 billion a year, really benefit wildlife, but they're not for wildlife. They're
Sure.
for something else. They just roundabout, they benefit wildlife.
Sure. What I'm talking about are things that are actually dedicated sources to wildlife.
But I want everybody to understand. So when people are like, oh, why do they Pittman Robertson? Something else generates this much money. But we're talking about specific money that goes
like
to
Land and Water Conservation Fund. There's money that goes that can benefit have ancillary benefits.
But
to
just so
wildlife, right?
everybody understands, even that's not as large as these other sources of funding. The money that you get from licenses and tags and whatnot, and then the money that comes from PR dollars, they dwarf any effect that LWCF would have.
Fact. That's an absolute fact. Yep. So
Dwarf. That means they make it small.
And then there are two other ones that
Little.
are. Yeah, I get it. then there are two others that are pretty unique as well. So Georgia, the voters in Georgia in the last legislative session, and we talked about this at the time, created a wildlife trust fund where they did a diversion of sales tax dollars that they could tie to certain outdoor equipment and put it in a trust fund that they could then be used for wildlife projects, habitat improvement projects, things like that, which is similar but different to one in Wyoming, which is this wildlife and natural resource trust account, which when it was established, it was using extractive industry,
mineral industries.
revenue, and saying, okay, they're causing some disturbance with their oil and gas development and coal and uranium and trona and whatnot. They're causing some disturbance, and we'll take some of the funds that they're paying in severance taxes, and we'll have that set aside for this wildlife trust in perpetuity to be able to do wildlife restoration, habitat restoration projects around the state that could then, say the industry could say, hey, we paid for that. We're contributing to conservation there. So those are some of the.
Maybe this is a great time to shift gears, Dave.
Yeah, let's.
No, here's why.
And there are others out there, but we don't need to go into all of them. There are other ideas out there too.
But here's the deal. We just talked about this, and so you talked about mineral industries, and some would say those have an impact, and it's fair to say that people consider hunting to have an impact, and so a lot of people would come and say okay, well, I just wandered around the woods. I don't have an impact. Why should I pay? And I don't have an impact.
Can I tell you one of my it's one of my huge pet peeves?
I'm not taking anything out here except memories.
Right. Mm-hmm. So one of my huge pet peeves is the term non-consumptive or consumptive user, non-consumptive user. Mm-hmm. I hate those two terms. You have a large segment of the outdoor rec economy calling hunters consumptive users because we're going out and we're physically removing an animal. Okay, that's fair.
Oh, we
do take an animal. I consume too.
That's right.
And now I'm going to talk as a hiker. I'm going to say, well, look, all these other people are taking stuff from the land, whether it's the mineral guy or the logger or you as the hunter. I'm just wearing boots.
And I call BS. And now I have I have studies I can point to prove it, right? I mean, you can see the stuff coming out of Colorado, particularly in the Vail area, where you have this expansion of outdoor rec going into critical winter range for elk, for example, and it's actually causing disturbance that at a level that can be recorded that's affecting reproductive rates and fitness of the animals. They're not using areas because there's such high use. That is a consumptive use. You're having an impact.
We should call them non-contributory users.
I like it.
They don't contribute.
I like it.
That's
the non-contributory user community.
I love it, Mike. That's
this is trademarked.
Yeah, right.
patent pending.
Your Mountain.
We'll have some T-shirts, and hats
Non-contributory users.
that we can sell to some non-contributory users, and then we'll donate that money back
to Your
and
Mountain podcast.
I was going to say to wildlife management, and then they can say they're contributory users.
We're going to educate people.
Yeah. A portion of the proceeds goes to.
Yeah. But I love that saying because everybody that's using the great outdoors has a cumulative impact of some sort, and they are in effect a consumptive user. Even if you don't physically remove one specific animal, your cumulative impact of all the people out there are having an impact on animals.
Yeah, you can see that in
humanity
in a lot of the
roads,
national parks and things. And
I mean, this is part of what makes this whole conversation so frustrating, because it's so big that it's hard to get granular. Because if we're going to do something, somebody has to pay for these things. Somebody has to pay for these improvements. And the problem is, all these things are taxes, and so people who are clamoring for like all these wildlife benefits that they want, all these special, like, hey, you know what I want to do? I want to have the entire country look like Yellowstone. Okay, well, what's that going to cost us? How are we going to pay for that?
I don't want the whole country to look like Yellowstone.
I know.
Right? Were you thinking the same thing?
Yes.
Like, there are 3 million people in Yellowstone.
And you know what I'm saying.
Potholes everywhere.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying. I mean, that's the challenge. It's like people are saying, like, we want access here, we want great habitat there, and I want everything to be, and frankly, I want everything to be protected here.
Yeah.
And I want everything protected there. I don't want anything anywhere, but yet I want revenue to do all these things. And people understand. This is a real complex equation, and it requires some thinking outside the box. It also requires that we understand that revenue has to come from somewhere in order for something else to happen over here.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we have, and I think it's fair to say, because I've seen all the reports, the overwhelming majority, and I don't mean like not even a super majority, it's super duper, whatever majority of Americans value wildlife. It's over 80%. It's somewhere in that 80 to 90% range.
Then you ask how much
value
do you
wildlife. And most of those same people say, at least in a survey, when asked, would you be willing to pay more to conserve that wildlife? They almost all say yes.
All push Y on their computer.
Right. But then when the rubber meets the road, and you have to have that hard conversation, and you have to say, okay, the people that have been footing the bill for the past 100 years can't foot the whole bill anymore. Other people have to start chipping in.
Did you read the article that I wrote?
I will. I promise. I'll read it.
Because that's one of the points.
You write stuff? I've seen you take notes.
Swear.
Anyway,
put a plug in for your article. Dave's about to plug his, so you do yours.
No, I know you wrote one. Yeah, but
no, it's okay.
Do it.
Look it up. It's on the Federalist.
Yeah,
but it talks about the contribution. I did not pick the title of the article, just so everybody knows.
I did read the title, and that's what dissuaded me from reading the article.
But what the article talks about is it talks about these funding issues, and just how much the sporting community pays into conservation of wildlife and habitat, and how short-sighted it is sometimes to think, hey, we could just cut part of our group out. As hunters, we represent only 20% of a larger group. As hunters, we can get rid of that 80%, no big deal. We don't need that money. And so that's the basis of the article, was talking about, hey, look, we need to understand that as hunters, we are taking money from non-hunting resources to help us improve habitat for wildlife. And we need to be okay with accepting that money and wrapping our arms around those other communities that are paying into the pot to help us have better wildlife and habitat. If we're not willing to do that as hunters, we're done.
We also need to be able to put our arms around people that aren't paying in right now and welcome them, as you have said under the past. Everybody should come under the same tent here.
Yeah.
And the tent is having a sustainable wildlife resource for not only us to enjoy for all of our various recreational activities, but so our kids can take their kids out and do the same thing.
Yeah.
Right.
I think I'm trying not to get us down too far of a rabbit hole, but imagine this. Just use it as an example of how come it's important to have all these other payers in here. Let's just pretend that I'm obsessed with Pittman Robertson.
At least a portion of it.
At least a portion of it. And let's just say that at Pittman Robertson, that I said, you know what? The only money that's going to wildlife habitat from Pittman Robertson now is hunters' money. All the rest of it is going to go, these other 80% of people paying into Pittman Robertson that don't hunt. So grandma who shoots and then the 3-gun guys, they're all going to take their 80% of Pittman Robertson. They get to use that to do something entirely different, whatever they want. Can you imagine how devastating that would be to our state wildlife agencies?
That'd be a heavy hit.
Yeah.
That'd be a real heavy hit.
Lucky for the hunting community, most of those people paying in don't know they're doing it.
So what do we do? How do we get you've talked about keeping the ones that are already paying. How do we keeping them together? But what do we do to broaden that sphere? So the outdoor states around the country are establishing offices of outdoor recreation. Universities are establishing degree programs in outdoor recreation. It's becoming a major focus for economies in particular of Western states where there's lots of public land and outdoor recreation opportunities.
Absolutely.
And
let's be honest, people aren't going to Montana to go to a football game.
I don't know, some might, but
nobody's going to Montana to for
Baseball.
shopping. Yeah,
well,
for
that's not
the
true.
World Series.
Montana, they are.
No, but I mean, reality, you look at these Western
There's
states.
no sales tax.
People, I used to say, people go to these Western states not because of what they do have, but because of what they don't. Because Wyoming has 2 escalators. For anybody that doesn't know,
one up, one down.
We used to say the reason that people come to Wyoming,
3 steps.
They don't come here for shopping malls or ballparks or IMAXs. They come here because we don't have any of those things. And for a huge part of the United States, the Western U.S., and the outdoor recreation economy, that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
Whether it's the slot canyons in Utah, whether it's Glacier National Park, they're coming there
That's right.
not because of things that man has built,
Right.
but because of what hasn't been.
Yeah, Colorado doesn't even have a football team, so.
Well, not a good one.
No, I agree with Mike right now. And I was a huge fan of their football team for a lot of years.
He said was.
No, I still
Now
once
you like
they
the
have
Bills.
No, once they have a football team again, I'll be a fan.
Wyoming's team, the Buffalo Bills.
I'm not a
right.
fair weather fan.
No.
They literally don't have a team right now. I am a fan of the Buffalo Bills. Good old Josh Allen, Wyoming 17.
It's our team.
But yeah, the point being, we have these states that are really trying to capture this momentum and attract people to come into this
Offices of
state.
outdoor recreation and 13 plus of them now.
Right. So all over the place. But
Yep.
So are those the entities that get on board with developing the new tax or the new way to fund it?
That's a great question.
it is a great question.
And we've actually, if you go and listen to episode number 2 of the Your Mountain podcast, you're going to hear why this is so challenging. Because the reality is, they should. But will they?
They've been fighting it
Since 1983.
I don't want to.
No. That's the industry. I'm talking about the outdoor.
Right, but it was the
outdoor
right.
recreation.
But the industry is what really pushed for the establishment of the offices.
Yeah, I know,
of
but they're
outdoor
there
recreation.
now. So
we're
why
wedded
aren't-
together.
Sure, but why aren't they
and
part
they-
of the conversation today?
They are.
They absolutely
and
are.
they are trying. I've talked to directors from every one of those states, and those directors are working at, moving the needle on this issue. But it's a difficult needle to move. Mm-hmm. It's a really difficult needle for them to move. And, they talk about, the $4 billion, 400.
No, it's almost 900 billion.
It's deceiving. There's two different numbers.
The one I've seen, the one that the Outdoor Industry Association puts
They
out,
put that to 900 billion.
It's almost 900 billion.
Yeah, but realize that that's
870
everything
billion.
onshore and offshore.
I agree. I know.
And so onshore in the U.S., you're looking at about half of that. That's the stuff that's all domestic. And the reason I know that is because guess what? The firearms community is about 1/10 of it. And that's another one that they don't really like to talk about a whole bunch. But the hunting and shooting community is 1/10 of that outdoor recreation economy is our community, the 5%ers and those who do sport shooting. And they don't talk about that a lot.
Right. So one thing that we should mention, and if you go back to episode 2, you'll kind of hear this. Well, you will hear this. But so the Outdoor Industry Association, all of your favorite brands, everything that you like to wear. I'm not going to say absolutely 100% to a company, but almost certainly is a member of the Outdoor Industry Association. So that backpack that you bought for your backpacking trip, or those trekking poles, or your tent, or whatever you bought, climbing gear, mountain bike, fat tire bikes, all that stuff, everything that you bought, those companies are probably a member of the Outdoor Industry Association. And if you actually look at that association, and they do a lot of great things, but from the conversation we're having right now about this funding, they were formed. Their reason for forming in the first instance was to fight
Ronald Reagan.
was to fight a backpack tax.
It was to fight Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had this great idea of like, hey, we could use some taxes from someplace else to help make our national parks like actually solvent and those types of things. And they said, no, not from us. We are already, and if you talk to them, they're going to say, well, we already pay taxes.
We have to pay tariffs on everything that
So it sounds like the hunting community is doing too good of a job. There is not the crisis that would lead them into contributing, like the crisis was that got the hunting community into contributing.
Because the state wildlife agencies have done a remarkable job managing what they have with the little that they receive.
Yeah. So there's no crisis there. Now, maybe it's going to take the idea that they show up to a trailhead and there really is no parking.
The crisis is looming, though. The crisis is looming. And I say that because, to backtrack to Colorado, the crisis is looming. Because now what we're seeing is, with this emphasis on the outdoor recreation economy, you know what we've discovered? When we invite all these people into the great outdoors as the non-contributing user community, they start to have an impact that the contributing user community can no longer offset with their dollars. There's not enough dollars coming in to offset the impacted dudes.
We don't often see solutions come from looming crises.
That's a fact.
It has to be an actual crisis.
Although I will say we're starting to see solutions coming from looming crisis, which is there's a fear right now of the next global mass extinction, and some of that is focused on the United States. And we've got one of our former governors and the CEO of Bass Pro Shops. We're co-chairs of this group called the Blue Ribbon Panel. Right? And the Blue Ribbon Panel was established to look at this funding, the wildlife crisis in America, as far as the hunted species are doing pretty well. But there are a lot of non-game, non-hunted species that are actually struggling a lot. And they're not listed, but they're struggling.
And they're not
moving
raptors.
That direction. And so this commission formed to come up with ideas and solutions for getting more money into these wildlife agencies to try and prevent, because the best medicine is preventative medicine. Right? It's way easier to cure something, to deal with something before you actually have to come up with a cure, right? So the preventative medicine is the ticket, and that's what they were working on. And they came up with what's called the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which has been running through the past 3 or 4 Congresses, and it would take a portion of royalties from offshore drilling and through an allocation formula give them back to the states for managing non-game sensitive species to the tune of like $1.3 billion. We're talking a year. We're talking about something on par with Pittman Robertson funds, like taking that and doubling it and getting that out to states. That's actually set for a markup in the House of Representatives this week. There's something like 136 co-sponsors. It's bipartisan. I think it's got 40 plus Republican co-sponsors on it. It's not going to move this Congress. It might have some movement in the House. It's not going to get through the Senate. It's got a ways to go. But to Mike's point, there's a recognition of and maybe it's an actual crisis. Maybe it's not the pending crisis. Maybe they're actually seeing raw data saying there are all these species crashing all over the country. We got to do something about it before it's too late.
Yeah,
I think we see the issues. It's just I don't see it hitting the average person yet.
I agree with you on that front. Yeah, it's the people that are
Engaged,
involved in
yeah.
this community that are really engaged and passionate about wildlife
Mm-hmm.
issues in some way know about this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? And recognize that we're at a tipping point and a potential crisis point, and we got to do something about it. But the general population, that their experience with nature is a walk through Central Park and in seeing the peregrine falcons in, on
Yeah,
skyscrapers
so the
around New York,
95% of the country.
The 95% of the country. How do we educate them?
Mm-hmm.
That's hard.
Maybe their friends need to tell them
Maybe they should-
about the Your Mountain
Yeah,
podcast.
they need to listen to this podcast. Right?
Yep.
You're on fire tonight, Mike.
Yeah, I know.
So now what?
Nephi's just shaking his
He
head.
is just shaking his head.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things to talk about and things to think about, but I think that the part I'm going to come back to, and my parting thought, is not going to be positive. It's going to be frustration. It's going to be frustration because even as we talk about this act, that we're excited about this act. Everybody is. Everybody thinks it's neat. The Recovering America's Wildlife Act has great potential. Once again, it's disappointing that what we're talking about is letting that non-contributory user base go ahead and continue to not contribute. Because what we're doing is we're saying, hey, you know what? We don't think that those guys actually should have to contribute. They want to be able to not care still, or to, and crank the tax off of something else. And to me, that's disappointing that community, won't step up, and talk about, if you're talking about, let's just call it a $400 billion industry. And let's just say, what would happen if we taxed that at 1%?
Well, let's take them at face value. Let's take them at the value that they say they're a almost $900 billion industry.
And then they look down their nose and like, oh, Pittman Robertson 11%, no way. Okay, fine. Let's do 1. Let's do 2% for conservation, that voluntary program that's been suggested that some companies are saying, well, we do 2% for conservation. Well, how do you do it? Is it cash? And they go, well, no, like we go out and we clean up trash and we do this.
Well, that's part of the 2%. 1%
That's right.
is time, and 1% is
And I'm just saying that,
right. And that's not a bad program.
and I'm just saying that if
I think that's a good program. Right. So
here's my invitation to anybody who listens to this who works at REI or has a friend that works at REI. Why don't you step up and say, like, yeah, let's pay the tax. Like, if you work at a big outdoor gear company, step up, be a leader. It's really easy to get back and say, hey, who should be paying for this? Offshore oil and gas. Hey, after we get our guaranteed LWCF funding, which also comes from there,
right.
like, then we're gonna let's talk about, like,
well, but at the same time, so this is there's some kind of great irony in this piece, right? So we want offshore oil and gas, or either royalties or lease royalties to pay, to pay for
wildlife
conservation through LWCF or through the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and at the same time we're saying
let's drive electric cars.
I was going to say at the same time we need to stop all oil and gas development across the country. There are actually
Buy a Tesla.
There are actually members of Congress that are, and I'm not going to call them out by name, but there are members of Congress that are supporting fully, permanent funding of LWCF using the
offshore oil and gas,
and supporting Recovering America's Wildlife Act, which I support both of those. I think they're great, right? But at the same time, they're also supporting a bill that would call for a moratorium on all leasing on public lands in the U.S. So
it's amusing. It's also
so
music.
it's we want to turn off the spigot that would actually pay for this.
Oh.
So
I'm gonna broaden your.
Which is what gets back to your
You
point.
just need to turn off the rhetoric.
I'm gonna broaden your reading.
Because you know that they're not supporting both of those at the same time.
How can they?
They're just
No,
supporting
they're
the
not.
convenient one.
They're odds with each other.
Yeah.
Right.
And
it's politically convenient.
Yes, it
to
is.
support it.
I'm gonna broaden your circle of ridicule and say, hey, look, once again, if we, hunters groups, people who like value public lands, how do you think we're paying for that management? So there are people say like, you know what, I love public lands. Kick everybody off them except my user group. How do you think we're paying for public land use? And it's not all of it, but tax dollars are paying in that. And guess what? Every time that somebody pulls an MCF of gas out of some public lands,
royalties are paying.
That's exactly right. You want to know who's paying for that ranger to drive around in the pickup and make sure that somebody isn't ripping up the land? It ain't you.
Right. Now that's an entirely different conversation of, how do you manage, how do you balance those the needs for open spaces and wildlife and recreational uses with the reality that we all drive cars and get on airplanes and use computers and cell phones, and we need these.
I think that the way that you do it is first of all, you just have to approach it from that pragmatic place of acknowledging it, because too often people are approaching these. Once again, it's this elitist mentality that is bred by ignorance of like they're approaching these problems from like a very looking through a paper towel tube, rather than broadening out to say, hey, what else is going on here that's affecting these
But I do think it gets to your point, right? So if you're out there, if you're a listener out there that says, yep, I support LWCF, I support Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and I want to see oil and gas leasing and drilling stop on public lands, I want to see offshore development stop. If you're in that boat, then you have to figure out where that funding is going to come from, and maybe you should start looking at yourself. And that's kind of, I think, to your point of, the rest of this outdoor economy, you got to start looking. You can't depend on everybody else to support your habits, or maybe not habits, hobbies, right? You can't depend on everybody else to support your hobbies. The hunting community 100 years ago said, we're going to pay to support our hobby. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for other groups to step up and say, I'm willing to play ball. Now, I know folks like snowmobilers will say, well, we pay a trail fee, right?
Yeah, license.
Yeah. So there are going to be some users that say we contribute in some way.
Yeah.
And that's fine. In different states, maybe groups contribute in different way in different states. I don't know how every state is set up. Certainly on the federal level, there's not an equivalent to Pittman-Robertson for everybody else.
Let's just say that no matter what of these, any of these alternative sources you're looking at, I would say it's fair to say they don't, again, they're dwarfed by the amount that hunters are paying it.
Right. And we don't use it feels weird to keep using the tax and fee word. I consider myself somebody that, wants to live within my means, and I want our government to live within their means. And I don't want to see my taxes go up any more than you want to see your taxes go up. I'm just saying, if you're in this camp of
final point
of saying we want to have all of this, all of that has to be paid for.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out how to pay for that.
For everybody that's saying, I already pay taxes, which is fair. Hopefully we all do. And those companies that are saying, well, we pay taxes, we pay tariffs. The ingenious thing that was done with Pittman Robertson was what?
They took an existing tax and diverted it to a different source.
And then what did it make states do?
Yeah, it required states everything that was generated, all license sales had to stay in-house. They couldn't divert it for other purposes.
That's right. That money is not going into the treasury and being lost into these other random programs. So as you look at these solutions and what we could do, I think that's the key, is we can't just step back and say, hey, you know what? We already pay taxes here, we pay taxes there, and we'll take money from the treasury to do this. What we need to do is we need to talk about how we can find dedicated funding that stays where it's supposed to. And that's the brilliance of this work that was done 100 years ago almost. And that's kind of, to me, that's the challenge for us to look at now, is how do we replicate that?
And I need to put in a plug for somebody that's working on this right now, this issue, and a state legislator as well, who's been out front on this and has proposed an idea that technically, legally doesn't work, but it's still not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea. We have a very conservative representative in this state, Albert Summers, who sponsored a non-binding resolution, right, in the House two sessions ago, I think, early 2018, and it was recognizing that wildlife in national parks that everybody comes from all over the world to see only spends a small portion of its time in those national parks. And he was using Yellowstone as the example, right? 2.5, 3 million people a year, maybe more than that, coming to Yellowstone National Park. And they're paying an entrance fee that's used. Part of it stays within the park, part of it goes to the rest of the park system. Most of it stays within Yellowstone. But most of the wildlife, the big wildlife that people come to see, are only there for a few months in the summer. And the rest of the year, they're on the surrounding national forest and private lands and state lands and BLM. And so his thought was, you know what? Those millions of people a year that are coming from all over to see that wildlife should help pay for supporting that outside of the park boundaries. And so he was proposing a fee be added onto the entrance fee that would be diverted back to the state to manage wildlife outside of the park boundaries.
That was 2016.
Was it? No, it wasn't that long ago.
Those non-contributory
I don't think it was that long ago.
users.
It might have been 17. It does, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, so
Matters to Dave.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because he started that, and then it's been carried forward by a mutual friend of all of ours, Temple Stollinger, who's a professor at the University of Wyoming College of Law, and the Hobbs School of Environment and Natural Resources. And she's worked with a professor from Berkeley, Arthur Middleton, and they've put together, and a couple of others, I'm sorry I'm forgetting your names if you're listening, but they've put together an analysis of that, and they recognize the same thing I did, that there's some hurdles in the federal law to be able to do that, but they've come up with some alternative ideas to actually implement that idea in a roundabout way to generate revenue off of visitors to parks to help states manage wildlife. And so that's a creative solution, an idea generated by a very conservative legislator that is very pro-wildlife, and I just kind of wanted to plug that because I get really frustrated when people say you can't be conservative and care about wildlife, and I hear that too often these days as it gets more divisive around the country. There's a great example of one that does and just says, look, hunters can't bear this.
I've actually never heard that.
You haven't?
Can't. I've heard, no, I'm just kidding. It's sort of, like, it's funny because
I'm sure you have.
You can't be conservative and care about wildlife. That's one of there's 2 or 3 statements I consider dumbest statements ever. There you go.
But you've heard that before.
Well, there's an assumption that that's not the case, and it is extremely frustrating. And,
right.
and yeah, it's the guy that, I started this talking about a Facebook argument. That's what was going on. It's somebody saying, like, you know what? You got to vote. You have to vote progressive if you're going to vote for people that care about land, water, and wildlife. I'm like, what are you talking about? That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's just not true.
Well, I also don't like the term progressive, the way it's used.
Yeah,
I view myself as relatively progressive, but maybe not in the political sense.
You are so not progressive that it's ridiculous.
Well, maybe that's true. I'm wearing... okay, fair enough. Just looking at myself. I haven't paid for a haircut in 20 years. That's, yeah, okay, fair enough. Anyway, Mike, your eyes are moving back and forth between us, and you're saying
wondering
nothing.
when we're progressing to the end.
We've gotten that, my friend.
Is that your transition to saying, I want to go to bed?
No. We've met Tymoson's minimum requirement for commute.
That's true. I hope we made your commute enjoyable, Chris. Anyway, this is a fun discussion. I actually really enjoyed this discussion, and we could continue this. In fact, we should continue this on another episode.
We're just going to continue it right now.
So
just kidding, Mike.
Get comfortable. No, but we will continue it in the future because there'll be more creative solutions coming up. There'll be more proposals at the state level, at the federal level, and we're going to want to talk about those. Yep.
And hopefully it's by people who are actually willing to dip into their own pockets instead of somebody else's. It's mine.
You're really on that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to push you off that
or
limb.
Or give up something now
To
and
get
take that
something
money and put it somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the other alternative, to say, okay, what can I live without to make this work? Yep. All right. Well, we've probably made some people mad listening to this one.
Good. I want them to write in about a comment.
yeah. Tell
Where
me
do
why
they
you're
do
mad.
that?
They do that at itsyourmountain.com.
Where else can they do that?
Facebook,
Well, it's
Instagram, Twitter.
yeah, but it's your mountain at itsyourmountain.com.
Oh, yeah, that'd be the email.
Yeah.
I want to get.
Yeah,
any-
so everybody should do that. Write in your mountain at itsyourmountain.com. What were those social media sites again?
At It's Your Mountain.
That's right, at all the normal places,
That's
right?
right.
And while you're at it, while you're out there on the interwebs,
Uh-huh.
we'd really appreciate you going out and giving us a rating.
and buying one of our T-shirts.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, but first give us a
Christmas
5-star
present.
rating.
Christmas
And
present.
then Christmas is around the corner.
Yeah, where can they find the store?
You set it up.
On the website. It's on our website.
That's true.
It's a link on our website.
We have a link on the website.
Yeah.
It's and the website is itsyourmountain.com. And you can
Christmas is around the
find the
corner.
link there to the store, and you'll get all of your mountain goodies, from mugs and stickers and sweatshirts and shirts, whatever you need, all the swag.
You need all those things.
Yeah.
I think we have cell phone covers. And,
Yeah, we
we got it all,
Yeah.
right? And so go out there and get to our website. Go buy a whole bunch of stuff. Make all your friends and family happy.
You know what your wife wants for Christmas? Your mountain swag.
That's what
There,
my
there-
wife
no, there is
wants.
female stuff on there. And there's
Yeah.
kid stuff, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my wife actually put it on her Christmas list. She wants a Your Mountain or a Your Mountain sweatshirt.
She's too good for you. You know that, right?
Oh, I've known that for a long time.
Okay.
So is everybody else.
On that note, anyway, go out, buy that stuff. Leave us a rating, 5-star preferably, and a review. That's the kind of stuff that keeps it, as we said before, it keeps us coming back. We really appreciate all the feedback. And until next time, this has been a lot of fun. I almost don't want to end it, but until next time, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.